The television studio was an artificial battlefield, a domain where words could cut deeper than knives and reputations could be shattered in a moment. The bright studio lights, blinding and relentless, beat down on the stage, creating an almost oppressive atmosphere. Even those who weren't nervous would find themselves sweating under the intensity. But Sylvester Stallone wasn't nervous. He had weathered far greater storms than this. Seated comfortably in the interview chair, his posture exuded confidence. Legs apart, shoulders relaxed, he was waiting, prepared for whatever lay ahead. Across from him, Ethan Caldwell sat poised, a TV host renowned for his sharp, progressive takes and his penchant for luring guests into verbal traps. Dressed in a meticulously tailored suit, his grin was one of a man who believed he had the upper hand. He thrived on the stumble, the hesitation, the moment a guest contradicted themselves. The audience murmured, anticipation hanging in the air like an electric charge. Many held their phones at the ready, sensing that something was about to unfold that would be worth recording. A confrontation was brewing. Ethan leaned forward, the polished wood of his desk gleaming under the lights. His voice, smooth and rehearsed, cut through the expectant silence. "Mr. Stallone," he began, his tone measured but laced with the promise of provocation, "you've always been a symbol of American toughness. But do you think that kind of masculinity is outdated? I mean, in today's world, don't you think we should redefine strength to be more inclusive?" A ripple of chuckles moved through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, recognizing the game Ethan was playing. They had seen him dismantle guests before. They expected Stallone to flinch, to fumble. Instead, Stallone blinked, slow and deliberate, before leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He exhaled through his nose, the sound barely audible but carrying the weight of a man who had been through more than mere debates. "You mean," he said, voice low, steady, "do I think being tough is a bad thing now?" Ethan smirked, the well-worn lines of a seasoned debater etched into his expression. "Well, I think we're past the era where men need to punch their way through problems. Don't you think the world has moved on from that kind of outdated thinking?" A silence stretched between them, thick enough to make people shift in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin. Then he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a deep, rich belly laugh. The kind that came from genuine amusement rather than obligation. "You're serious?" he said finally. "You think toughness is a problem?" Ethan straightened his tie, regaining composure. "I think it can be toxic when it discourages vulnerability, yes?" Stallone nodded, his movements deliberate, as if processing the words. Then he leaned back, arms stretching along the back of his chair, owning the space with an effortless command. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice still calm but edged with steel. "If someone broke into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy in there? Or do you want someone who's going to sit down and talk about their feelings?" A few gasps echoed in the audience. Scattered claps followed. Ethan opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't finished. "Toughness ain't about punching walls or yelling the loudest," Stallone continued. "It's about standing your ground when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, hard work. And if you think the world doesn't need that anymore," he shook his head, "I don't know what world you're living in, man." Ethan forced a chuckle, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation. This wasn't the response he had expected. He was used to guests stumbling, scrambling to defend themselves. Stallone wasn't scrambling. He was advancing. "All right," Ethan said, adjusting the stack of cue cards in his lap. "But don't you think Hollywood, and let's be honest, your own movies, have glorified violence as the only solution to problems?" Stallone didn't hesitate. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things. You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" Laughter rippled through the room, real and unforced. Even some of Ethan's crew members smirked. Ethan pressed on. But you've built a career playing tough, no-nonsense characters. Guys who solve problems with their fists, guns, or brute force. Do you ever think about the message that sends? Stallone smirked. First of all, I make movies. Movies ain't real. You know that, right? He raised an eyebrow. Last time I checked, I never actually went 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. Never took down a whole army with a red bandana and a knife. Never ran up those steps in Philly and single-handedly fixed people's problems. More laughter. Ethan tried again. Sure, but movies shape culture. Kids grow up watching Rambo and Rocky. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence? Stallone exhaled through his nose. Man, you ever seen Rocky? He shook his head. That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up. It was about heart, perseverance. And Rambo? He shrugged. That guy was just trying to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town and mind his business, none of that would have happened. The audience clapped, a little louder this time. Ethan's jaw clenched. This wasn't going his way. He tried to pivot. Let's talk about America right now. We're at a point where people are questioning what it means to be a man, what it means to be tough. Some might argue that your version of toughness, the old school, don't show weakness kind, is part of the problem, that it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that? Stallone let the question hang. Then, he tapped his fingers on the armrest, eyes locked on Ethan. You ever meet a firefighter? Ethan blinked. Excuse me? A firefighter. A cop. A guy in the military. Hell, even a single mom working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. You ever talk to those people? Ethan hesitated. Well, You think toughness is their problem? Stallone shook his head. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The energy in the room shifted. Ethan's control was slipping. Stallone leaned forward, voice firm but calm. The problem ain't toughness. The problem is people thinking strength is something bad, like it's dangerous. Weakness ain't a virtue, pal. Strength with control, that's what keeps people safe. Silence. The kind that meant something had landed. In the back, someone let out a low whistle. Ethan swallowed. He had more questions lined up, more attempts to regain control. But the audience had shifted. They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Stallone's next words. And Stallone wasn't done yet. The studio is flooded with spotlights. The tension in the air is palpable even through the screens of the audience. Ethan Caldwell, a well-known journalist and presenter, sits opposite his guest, the legendary actor and symbol of masculinity, Sylvester Stallone. The presenter expects an easy victory, exposing outdated ideals. But the further the conversation goes, the more he understands that this person will not break under pressure. From the very beginning of the interview, Caldwell tries to set the tone, emphasizing that the world has changed, that society is rethinking the role of strength and masculinity. Stallone is in no hurry to answer, pauses, then calmly asks, Are we really thinking critically, or are we just criticizing? There are cheers in the studio. Someone applauds. Even the cameramen exchange glances. This is no longer an interview. This is a clash of ideologies. The presenter is trying to seize the initiative. If rigidity is so important, why do so many people reject it? Stallone takes his time. His voice gets quieter, almost conspiratorial. Because weak people don't like being reminded that they are weak. The audience explodes into applause. The cameras catch Caldwell's confusion. He is not prepared for such a turn. Stallone continues, Life is going to strike, whether you like it or not. The question is, can you take the hit and keep moving forward? This time, the host has nothing to say. As soon as the interview ends, Caldwell ends the broadcast with a tight smile, but panic reigns behind the scenes. The producers are in a hurry to edit the material, but it's too late. The audience in the hall has started posting videos online. In a matter of hours, the internet explodes with headlines. Stallone destroys TV presenter on live TV. Legend versus awakened journalism. Opinions are divided. Some admire the actor's resilience, while others accuse him of promoting toxic masculinity. Caldwell and his TV channel are trying to smooth things over by issuing official statements, but no one listens to them. Stallone is silent. He doesn't tweet. He doesn't give interviews. He doesn't make a scandal. He just goes on with his life. After a few days, famous personalities, firefighters, military veterans, and single mothers begin to support the actor's words. They say that in the real world, strength is not aggression, but the ability to overcome difficulties. It's not about fighting, it's about endurance. Caldwell disappears from the front pages, his show loses its rating, and his name becomes a symbol of weakness in front of the truth. Stallone remains true to himself. In a small gym in San Diego, a journalist asks him if he expected such a reaction. He just smiles and shrugs his shoulders. I was just telling the truth. And that's probably the whole point. In a world full of noise and lies, it is the truth that becomes the rarest and most valuable resource. And this episode reminded people what it means to be truly strong.